Donald Trump just did something no American president has ever done. Not in wartime, not in crisis, not ever. He publicly demanded Canada be expelled from NATO while simultaneously dishonoring their war dead. 457 Canadian soldiers killed fighting alongside Americans in Afghanistan. And Trump just called their sacrifice meaningless. This isn't a gaffe. This is a calculated assault on the transatlantic alliance that has kept us safe for 75 years. From a prosecutor's perspective, what we're witnessing is the systematic dismantling of American credibility on the world stage, and it's happening in real time. Let me walk you through what actually happened, because the headlines aren't capturing the legal and institutional catastrophe unfolding here. On February 10, 2026, President Trump issued a statement, not a policy memo, not a diplomatic cable, a public statement demanding that NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte immediately begin proceedings to remove Canada from the alliance. His justification: Canada's defence spending sits at approximately 1.4% of GDP, below the 2% target NATO members agreed to reach. Now, here's what they're not telling you. There is no mechanism in the North Atlantic Treaty to expel a member state. None. Article 13 allows members to withdraw voluntarily after giving 1 year's notice, but forced expulsion that would require unanimous consent from all 32 member states to amend the treaty itself, a process that has never been successfully completed in NATO's history. Trump is demanding something that literally cannot happen under international law. But let's zoom out. Why Canada? Why now? Canada has been a founding NATO member since 1949. Canadian forces fought in Korea. They deployed to the Balkans. They spent 13 years in Afghanistan, the longest military engagement in Canadian history. 457 soldiers killed, over 2,000 wounded. They invoked Article 5 after 9/11, the only time in NATO's history that collective defense clause has been triggered. And they showed up. They fought. They died. And here's the kicker. Canada announced in 2024 a comprehensive defense modernization plan committing to reach 2% GDP spending by 2032. They're on track. They've increased procurement. They've expanded Arctic defense capabilities that directly benefit American security in the North. So this isn't about spending. This is about something else entirely. Pay attention to this next part. Within hours of demanding Canada's expulsion, Trump posted on Truth Social that Canadian casualties in Afghanistan were a bad investment and that their soldiers died for nothing because we lost anyway. Let that sink in for a second. The President of the United States just told grieving Gold Star families and an allied nation that their loved ones died meaninglessly. Canadian Prime Minister's office issued a rare formal rebuke. The Canadian Defence Minister called it an insult to the memory of the fallen and an attack on the core principles of our alliance. But here's where this gets legally and constitutionally dangerous. From a prosecutor's perspective, what Trump is doing here violates multiple federal statutes and constitutional principles. And I'm going to explain exactly how. First, the Logan Act 18 U.S. Code Par 953 prohibits unauthorized citizens from negotiating with foreign governments to influence their measures or conduct. Trump is the president, so you might think he's authorized. But here's the problem. The Constitution vests the treaty-making power in the President by and with the advice and consent of the Senate. The North Atlantic Treaty was ratified by the Senate in 1949. Trump cannot unilaterally alter or withdraw from NATO without Senate consent. Precedent established in Goldwater versus Carter suggests this, though the Supreme Court left it unresolved. Trump is attempting to force a treaty modification, expelling a member without any congressional authorization whatsoever. That's not how our constitutional system works. That's autocracy. Second, and this is what keeps me up at night, Trump is actively undermining a treaty alliance that forms the backbone of American national security. Article 66 of the Constitution makes treaties the supreme law of the land. By demanding Canada's expulsion, Trump is directing NATO officials, and by extension American diplomats, to violate treaty obligations the United States is legally bound to uphold. Here's what they're not telling you. This could constitute a violation of his oath of office. The presidential oath requires him to faithfully execute the office of president and preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution, systematically destroying our treaty alliances. That's the opposite of preservation. But there's a deeper Prosecutor question here. Why would Trump pick this fight now? What's the strategic calculus? Let me give you the evidence-based answer, because this follows a pattern we've seen in other federal investigations. Trump has spent years publicly questioning NATO's value. That's documented. During his first term, he reportedly told advisors he wanted to withdraw from NATO entirely, confirmed by John Bolton, his own former national security advisor, in sworn testimony before Congress. In 2018, Trump allegedly told EU leaders that NATO was as bad as NAFTA, trade deals and defense treaties conflated into the same grievance framework. But here's the prosecutorial insight. The timing of this Canada demand is not random. 3 weeks ago, the International Criminal Court issued arrest warrants for senior Russian military officials for war crimes in Ukraine. Canada immediately announced they would enforce those warrants on Canadian soil. The United States has not. Trump has remained conspicuously silent on enforcing international criminal accountability for Russian aggression. Now connect the dots. Trump attacks the one NATO ally actively pursuing legal accountability for Russia. He does it by invoking defense spending, a metric that affects nearly every NATO member. But he singles out Canada, not Germany, which was below 2% for years, not Spain, not Italy, Canada. From a prosecutor's perspective, this looks like retaliation, and there's precedent for understanding Trump's behavior through this lens. During the first impeachment inquiry, we saw witness tampering in real time. Trump's tweets attacking Maria Ivanovich while she testified before Congress. That's obstruction. That's intimidation. The pattern is clear. Trump uses public statements as weapons to punish those who cross him. But let's talk about the comments on Canadian war dead, because this is where the legal exposure gets even worse. Under the Uniform Code of Military Justice, Article 88 prohibits commissioned officers from using contemptuous words against the president or other officials. Trump is commander-in-chief. But here's what legal scholars are now debating. Whether dishonoring Allied soldiers killed in action alongside US forces constitutes conduct unbecoming of the office, potentially impeachable conduct. Think about this for a second. American soldiers fought alongside those 457 Canadians. They shared bases, missions, trauma. Some Americans were saved by Canadian forces. Some Canadians died protecting American positions. When Trump says their deaths were for nothing, he's not just insulting Canada. He's telling American Gold Star families that their sons and daughters who served in the same theater under the same mission died for nothing too. That's not political speech. That's corrosive to military morale, to Allied cohesion, to the foundational trust that makes joint operations possible. Let me explain what this means for democracy, for accountability, and for the rule of law. Because the consequences here extend far beyond one inflammatory statement. First, institutional collapse. NATO has survived the Cold War, the Balkans, 9/11, Afghanistan, Russian aggression in Georgia and Ukraine. It has never faced an existential threat from an American president actively trying to destroy it from within. If Trump succeeds in fracturing NATO, even partially, he will have accomplished what 75 years of Soviet and Russian strategy could not. And here's the terrifying part. He's doing it without congressional authorization, without judicial review, without any constitutional check on his power. We are watching unilateral executive action in foreign policy reach levels that would have horrified the founders. Second president. If a president can demand the expulsion of a treaty ally based on personal grievance, what's next? Can he expel South Korea, Japan, Australia? The slippery slope isn't hypothetical. It's happening right now. Third, criminal exposure. And I want to be very clear about this because it's going to matter in 2029 when Trump is no longer president. If Trump's actions directly harm US national security, and demanding Canada's expulsion from NATO objectively harms our security, there are federal statutes that could apply. 18 US Code per 2381 defines treason as giving aid and comfort to enemies. Now, I'm not saying Trump has committed treason. That requires a very high bar, including a state of declared war. But undermining our alliances to the benefit of adversarial powers, that's the kind of conduct that invites serious legal scrutiny. What precedent does this set for future commanders-in-chief? From a prosecutor's perspective, the evidence here would be devastating. Public statements, documented harm to allied relations, reaction from adversaries. Russia's Ministry of Foreign Affairs has already praised Trump's comments as realistic and refreshing. When your policy positions are being celebrated by Moscow, you've got a problem. But here's what worries me most. As someone who spent decades inside DOJ, we've lost the ability to hold powerful people accountable in real time. Impeachment is dead as a constitutional remedy. We saw that twice with Trump. The 25th Amendment requires cabinet cooperation, and Trump has installed loyalists in every position of power. Federal courts move slowly, and by the time a case winds through appeals, the damage is done. So what's left? Public pressure, congressional oversight, and the knowledge that eventually the pendulum swings. Eventually there's accountability. It might not come fast enough. It might not come while Trump is in office, but it will come. History doesn't forget. Here's the bottom line, and I need you to understand this clearly. What Trump did to Canada, demanding expulsion, dishonoring war dead, is not a one-off. It's a stress test. He's testing how far he can go, how much he can destroy before anyone stops him. And so far, no one has. The Senate hasn't censured him. The House hasn't launched oversight. Allied nations are issuing statements and then waiting to see what happens next. This is how democracies die. Not in a dramatic coup, in slow, grinding erosion of norms, treaties, alliances, trust. From a prosecutor's perspective, we're watching a criminal enterprise operate in plain sight. And the tools we normally use to stop it, indictments, trials, accountability, are being blocked by the office he holds. But here's what gives me hope. The law is patient, the record is permanent. And eventually, the American people decide whether they want to live in a nation governed by law or by the whims of one man. Stay informed. Pay attention to what's happening. Because the only way we survive this is if enough people understand what's at stake. More accountability and truth